Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. Well, here we are again. Today is March 11th. It is the 5-year anniversary of when the WHO first declared COVID-19 to be a pandemic. I distinctly remember that day very well. I was actually on my way home from Montana. I had traveled to Kalispell, Montana for a short vacation. You got to remember, at the time we thought that this thing would blow over, and I just wanted to get out there while the school was closed. And so it was around the end of my trip that we realized this is going to go on a little bit longer than we had thought. March 11 happens to also be the anniversary of the Fukushima disaster. And as kind of a prayer for that, I went on a fast. I fasted for 30 some hours that time, if I remember correctly. But as I headed closer to Seattle, I heard that COVID-19 had been declared a pandemic. I learned that the WHO had actually started to recommend that it's okay to, as a gag, I heard on the radio that they said it was okay to refuse to shake hands. If you're at an occasion that calls for it, to tell people that you're going to avoid shaking hands, that the WHO has given us permission to do that. That was the first thing that I heard on the day of the declaration. And then I got back home to Seattle, and I quickly booked an Airbnb because I was living in my car at the time. And so I used to live out of my car 6 months out of the year, believe it or not. Seattle was very conducive to that. Even here in Phoenix, I still do that in between places if I want to look for a good place, right? But I booked an Airbnb, and I booked it for 3 weeks, thinking that this was going to be over. And I got a really good deal on it because nobody was traveling at the time. But at the time, I was so messed up, though. I really loved in-person work, much more so than I had thought, right? People say that if I won $1 million, I would retire. No, I need the connections. Actually, this past week, I did win $1 million. I didn't retire. I'll talk about that in a moment, too. But people say I win $1 million, I'm going to retire. That's the furthest thing from my mind. If I won $1 million, I might go looking for a better job, right? I have more room to look for a better job. But I was so heartbroken. I was dating a girl much younger than me. She lived with her parents and grandparents, and so I couldn't see her because we have to keep them safe. And so it was really, really messed up. Now, something happened at the beginning of that pandemic. On March 19th, Mars and Jupiter came into conjunction. And when I went out to see that, it felt really good because at least something was working right? Despite the school closing, despite countries closing, despite all the uncertainty, the toilet paper being out at the store, Mars and Jupiter still come together. It was a weird feeling. It's the weirdest feeling in the world. Next time there's a crisis, go out there and look at an astrological event. It really changes things a lot. It's kind of like the overview effect, right? Except it's here on Earth. It kind of feels like that. But so Mars and Jupiter came into conjunction, and then I remember thinking to myself, December 21st of 2020, Jupiter and Saturn are going to come into conjunction. Hopefully things will have blown over at the time. Hopefully things will have blown over, and I was going to propose to my girlfriend on the day of the conjunction, December 21st, 2020. I'll talk about what actually happened. It's a different romantic story that actually happened. But and then I booked the Airbnb, and after the 2 weeks that we were supposed to lock up expired and I needed to get out of the Airbnb, I did some reading and discovered that I could renew that Airbnb at the same rate. Governor Inslee had signed an eviction moratorium that was really comprehensive, and it allowed you to stay at your current rate, even if it was a short-term rental. And the owner was so pissed. She had given me such a good, I think it was like $800 a month for an apartment that normally, especially if as a short-term basis, should have been going for more like $2,000-3,000 a month. She was so pissed at the whole thing. And so then eventually I moved out to, after the moratorium had expired, I moved out to the Rockies. First, I moved to Ellensburg, Washington for a month, and then I moved to Montana and Idaho. It was during my time in Idaho and Montana that I finalized the breakup with my girlfriend. We were going down completely different paths, and it's good that COVID-19 woke us up to that. While I was in Montana, we started to reopen things to 25, 50% capacity. And at the time, I had a lot of social anxiety. And I thought to myself, this is my chance of a lifetime. I get to go out and enjoy social settings at much lower capacities that I could tolerate. And for the first time in a long time, I went to a bowling alley during the nighttime, actually, with the lights and the sounds. I could tolerate that if it's not completely packed. I can't do that anymore now that it's 100% capacity, unfortunately. And I got really good at bowling. My highest score was, I think, a 240 something. And unfortunately, I can only go during the lesser peak hours nowadays. And then 2021, I returned to Seattle. I was doing tutoring. I had clients who needed the in-person tutoring. And I returned to all the toxicities of seeing people face to face, right? The prejudices. I'm one of the few people, most workplaces that I go to, I'm one of the few people who is single, no children. And people think that I'm available at all the odd hours and all that. And then we had another spike in COVID. And that's when I discovered Phoenix, Arizona. I moved here the first time around in June of 2021. It was actually on my anniversary, June 13, 2021. And I discovered a couple board game meetups, and unfortunately, I eventually ran into some toxicity, but I had some good times at the beginning. I missed an opportunity to make a move on a girl, though. I was at the meetup, and there's this girl that I liked, but one day we were talking about something, and she mentioned the existence of her boyfriend. She had mentioned something like she was doing something with her boyfriend or something to that effect. And my heart sank. I don't know if she noticed my heart sank. Fast forward 3 years later, I was recently talking to her. She was talking about how she had this toxicity with her boyfriend and how it led to her having a miscarriage and all that. And so I said, there's something I wanted to tell you. And she asked me, what was it? She said, back in 3 years ago when I first met you, I actually wanted to ask you out. But one day you were talking about something and the concept of your boyfriend came up. Can I ask you something? I don't want you to be hurt by this. But can I ask you, if I had asked you out, would you have given second thoughts of your boyfriend at the time? And she admitted she would have. And I missed out, all because I got scared. And so I learned from that to never get scared away by somebody who either mentions their boyfriend or even their husband, or somebody who mentions that they would never dream of dating anybody, to take that with a huge grain of salt from now on. But I missed out on that. And that winter, I was teaching at a tutoring center where I ran into even more toxicity. I had a colleague who was much younger than me, and she had inappropriate feelings for me. And our boss kind of encouraged that, if you could believe it. And then I had other colleagues who had family matters to tend to, and I always got the wonkiest hours. And I always filled in for that. But then on Thanksgiving, my boss really disappointed me. He had asked me, well, the whole week of Thanksgiving was really busy. We only had me and my boss. We had a lot of students. You got to remember, they had just recovered from COVID. And so those are very tough hours I was working. I knew on Thanksgiving Eve, on the Wednesday, there would be one student that I really liked, a fifth grader, a girl. She was already studying pre-calculus, if you could believe it. I really liked working with her, and my boss knew that. And so I got through all the other students, and at 6 o'clock, the center opens from 3 to 7. At 6 o'clock, she shows up, but all the other students had already left. And I started working with her, and my boss asked me to leave. On Thanksgiving Eve, working with my favorite student, he asked me to leave. And what was doubly more upsetting than that was that I was living out of my car at the time. I know, it's weird. I was living out of my car at the time. So not only did I lose my favorite student, lose the hour of work, I also lost the hour of heating in the tutoring. So he doesn't know that last part of the situation, obviously, but it was upsetting. And I left, and I headed to Wallace, Idaho. We had a few days off. I headed to Wallace, Idaho. When I got to Idaho, it hit me. I wonder if he's going to still pay me for that hour, because after all, that whole Thanksgiving week was wacky. So I get my pay stubs on November 30, and I did not get paid for that hour. I was so upset. I don't know if I was more upset by his attitude or more upset by the loss. I probably wasn't upset about the money. I mean, I didn't need that money, but I had another job at the online at the I was teaching at a technical college. I didn't need that hour of pay, but I was more upset at the whole attitude of the whole thing, right? And it wasn't even like had he told me up front about all. Plus, I mean, those hours that I worked at Thanksgiving week were already wacky to begin with, right? And so had he told me up front before Thanksgiving, hey, money's kind of tight, we're not doing very well during this COVID. I can only give you this many hours during Thanksgiving week. That would have been a whole different story. But to wait until I was working with my favorite student to ask me to leave, that was so upsetting. And I learned from that moment in time to take everything that my work tells me with a huge grain of salt, right? Unfortunately, I've never run into a perfectly healthy workplace, right? People are very individualistic. Even my current job at the community college, I still have to take things with a grain of salt, right? Which is really upsetting, because I'd rather put my energy into better things. The war in Ukraine had broken out, and so once again, I had to fill in for all of my colleagues who had mental health issues and all that. I had some pretty bad mental health issues from that too. What had happened was, on the news, Ukrainian refugees were fleeing to Poland, and they were showing the train station in Warsaw, Poland, with the baby strollers that the Polish families had left behind for the Ukrainian refugees who had fled. That image really hit me hard, actually, because 5 years earlier, I had broken up with yet another girl, a Polish girl, over her wanting children, and we had broken up. And the last time I ever saw her was actually at that station itself. And so it reminded me of all the children I didn't have. And now, it was also very heartbreaking, in the sense that what was a really fun place just 5 years ago has become that. And it really hit me hard. I had a rock that I had picked up from the beach many years earlier in Gdansk Bay, about the size of a fist. And I nicknamed the rock polonium, obviously, because it came from Poland. And so, to show support, I had a few colleagues who were involved in that. My boss was from Turkey, and two of my colleagues were from I forgot what country, but in the Eastern European area. So I took the polonium rock that I picked up from the beach, and I placed it in our fish tank at work as support for what was going on. And so it's just my luck. The next week, 2 fish from the fish tank died. And my colleague joked that the rock maybe contained actual polonium. And so it was bad luck. And it was just a bad sign of times to come with the war in Ukraine. So, and then eventually I left Seattle and or before I left Seattle, something else happened. I was working at another tutoring center that was significantly less toxic, but I still had to run into differences in work culture. I was teaching a kid AP chemistry. He had brought from home a periodic table, a really fancy one, that showed, among other things, properties of the elements, when they were discovered, how rare they are in the earth, and about pictures and stuff like that. And I was going to show him, this was 2022, I was going to show him how cheap platinum is, and how it's a good buying opportunity, and how it's almost as rare as gold, and like half or 1/3 the price, and maybe even silver as well. At the time, silver was going for 80, 90 times cheaper than gold, and it's only 10 times more common than gold. I was going to show him all that, and I looked at the periodic table, and I couldn't believe my eyes. There are a lot of elements that are rarer than gold, and some of them pretty cheap too. What especially caught my eye was bismuth. It was only 2-3 times more common than gold. And I knew it was a lot. I didn't know what the price of bismuth was at the time, but I knew it was considerably cheaper than even silver because I had seen people make crystals out of it. I had gone to other events and seen bismuth crystals. I knew it was cheaper than silver. Is it still cheaper than silver today? I got to check. But at the time, I knew it was still cheaper than silver. But I was going to show him the platinum. I still told him about the platinum. I said, maybe look up bismuth as well, but definitely platinum and silver. And I went home and read more about it myself, and I bought a 10-pound bismuth bar. And at the time, I was working at a tutoring center where I was seated all day, every day. And I didn't think it was healthy to not have too much exercise. So I brought the bismuth to the campus to lift as gym weights. The next day, my student comes and he thought it was platinum because that's all I talked about the day before. And it was bismuth. I said, I wish it were platinum. And I even used that as an opportunity to tell. He said that I could quit my job if it were platinum. And I said, no, why would I do that? I love working with you guys. And so I even used that as an opportunity to tell about that. Not long after that, I landed a job at a tutoring center here in Phoenix, and I moved here. Unfortunately, I continue to have difficulty with a little bit better than Seattle, I want to say, but I still continue to have difficulty with differences in life and with networking with people. I'm getting better at it. I learned that I wasn't bold enough with the networking. I've learned that it is better to be outright kicked out of a group for being too bold with networking than to, because if you think about it, let's say you make a bold move on a girl at a meetup group and you mess up and you either get kicked out of the group or you feel too embarrassed to ever show up to the group ever again. Well, do you know what happens if you never made the move on the girl? You've already kicked yourself out, right? I've learned that the hard way. So make that move and get kicked out if you need to, but don't kick yourself out of the group in the first place, right? That was a very big realization for me, actually. But my first 2 years of that, I didn't realize any of that, and I dealt with everything alone. Right? I had to deal with the toxic job alone. I had to deal with COVID-19 twice here alone. One of them during a heat wave as well, and I was so discouraged that I started calling myself the Peter Dislike Show, and that's when I started the jingle and all that. I missed my chance to make a move on another girl. I was living in a shared house with, let's see, there was the girl, there were two other guys, and then the manager. So there were 5 of us there. And the manager of the place was very annoying. He got super annoyed by every little noise during the night. And we're not talking about me turning on Taylor Swift at 2 a.m. No, we're talking about me getting home at 11 o'clock and having a quick meal or using the bathroom and flushing the toilet, walking around the house. And he got really upset at the noises. And it weighed heavily at me during the time I was at the apartment. You see, at the time, I wasn't a millionaire yet, and things like that. So if I got kicked out of the home, it would be a huge drag on me, right? I didn't have room to play with, right? I've learned the real value of financial wealth is to have room to play with so that you don't get scared shitless by every little detail that goes on in your life. I've learned, right? When I go to work and my boss says something off, it doesn't weigh nearly as much, right? It has turned what my boss used to say, what used to weigh as much as, I don't know, pick a really dense metal, osmium or gold or uranium, now weighs as much as hydrogen, right? When you, it floats out, right? It used to be, right? And now it just, it floats away, right? Like a balloon, right? Like hydrogen, right? Is hydrogen the least dense gas there is? I don't know. But it weighed heavily on me when my the apartment manager was barking orders at me at night. Like to give you an idea of how annoying he was, I was eating, I was walking, very tiptoeing, and he would be upset, and his anger was even more louder than whatever I was doing. And sometimes he woke people up, and then he'd blame me. Like, look at all your roommates who are woken up by this. You woke them up. And so it weighed heavily on me to the point that I forgot to even ask the girl out. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but unfortunately I didn't make the move on her, and I got her social media and all that, but she very seldom checks it, and that was that. Uh, to her credit, one time I asked her if that house was still around because I was in between places. I was like, and I lost the contact information for the owner and the apartment manager, and actually the apartment manager, he got fired from working that place. What had happened was, it's funny why he got fired. One day, me and we were showing another prospective tenant the place, and I didn't think the apartment manager was home. I had told the prospective tenant, "You got to be careful around Mark. He's very sensitive to noise." And just as I say that, Mark bursts out of this room and says, "Yeah, you were doing this or whatever. You did this. You did this. You did this." And he went on a rage, and the owner of the place got wind of that. I guess from the new tenant. I didn't tell the owner, but the new tenant probably complained to the owner. The apartment manager got Donald Trump from the job, and I was so happy when he got Donald Trump. Unfortunately, the owner didn't kick him out right away. I guess maybe he had a lease there, and the owner couldn't just remove him. But so now we had a very disgruntled employee in the house for the last couple of weeks I was there, and then I left, and that takes us to this past year. My grandmother passed away 3 months ago, and while I was at her funeral, before grandmother even passed away, I finally got to go on a date. But what had happened was I had met a good friend at church, and I had offered him, as well as anybody else who could set me up on a blind date, a reward for setting me up on a blind date. And so I started out with a 1 kilogram bar of silver, and then I added a bunch of bismuth art. Actually, I think the bismuth I gave him is now worth more than the silver I gave him. But at the time, the silver was the main attraction to the reward. And so before I knew it, he had arranged this date, and it's good. We didn't hit the sparks or anything, but I made a lot of connections through her and gained a lot of experiences through her, and it propelled me back, right? Because you got to remember where I was last summer. I was so discouraged that even if I could go on a date, I would mess it up because I was so discouraged, heartbroken, messed up. I was making a lot of art, but my storage locker was a disaster. My car was a disaster. I was so discouraged, right? I was kind of like, you know how when we measure unemployment, you don't measure the discouraged workers, right? I was a discouraged single at the point. You wouldn't even measure me as somebody who couldn't go on a date anymore, right? And that was how it was, right? But he propelled me out of that at least. Now I could actually be counted, and then I started dating again. What had happened was, I went to my grandmother's funeral. My grandmother coexisted with Mary Curry for about 6 months. She was born 6 months before we lost Mary Curry. And I thought my logic was that she could go communicate with Mary Curry and have her set me up on a blind date. Now, Mary Curry discovered polonium-210, which is made from bismuth nowadays. So I left a small chunk of bismuth in the casket at my grandmother's funeral to take to Mary Curry so she could continue her research. And wow, did that work. As soon as I left the funeral, I don't know what inspired me to reopen my Bumble account. I hadn't used Bumble for many years. And when I reopened it, I was aghast at what I had seen on there. At the time, I was writing a lot of computer games. I was doing stargazing. And also I had binge eating problems, and I was overweight. I had to delete all of that and start all over again. Actually, to give you an idea of how unhealthy I was. So if you looked at the two profiles side by side, you might assume I was younger today. And so that's another problem I have with Bumble. I often have to lie about my age just so I could get past everybody. If I tell my real age, or I shouldn't say my real age, if I tell my official age on Bumble with the picture that I have now, people will think I'm lying. And so they won't say it obviously, but I just won't get a whole lot of attention, right? And so I don't have to lie when I'm in Taiwan. The people actually take good care of their health in Taiwan. Anyways, before I knew it, I was having a good time with a girl in Taiwan. Unfortunately, it was the last day of the trip, and I had to fly home. I'm still talking to her these days, but it was a very heartbreaking experience having to fly home from that. I know I'll see her again someday, though. And then I get home, and I was so discouraged with Bumble. Again, I can't tell my actual age on there. I don't want to lie about my age. I sometimes, in the profile, I elaborate a little bit about that. Um, and But sometimes you got to be careful how you elaborate that too. So I was so discouraged that I outright asked people to swipe left. I said that, you know what? I've already gotten a couple weeks worth of left swipes. Why don't we go for a record? Please swipe left. And I pointed left on the screen and I said, please swipe left. And before I knew it, I got 30 some likes. And so I had to go buy a membership just to respond to that. And that's when I met the girl in Houston. And I took a trip on Valentine's Day. I needed a vacation anyway. I took a trip on Valentine's Day to go see her. And we continued to chat. I don't think we hit the sparks or anything. And then I come home and I meet a girl at the student union. And it's a blessing from Mary Curry because when she was talking about a birthday party she's having at her home, and I discovered she was born exactly on the 100-year anniversary of when we lost Pierre Curry. And so it was like a blessing from Mary Curry. Unfortunately, last night it looked like she was going through some mental health drama, and I had to calm her down. And so, and then this past week I discovered that bismuth prices hit the moon, and so obviously my friend who set me up on the blind date, I gave him about 40 pounds worth of bismuth art. He really hit it big, along with that 1 kilogram silver bar. And so I gave a few other rewards like that. So, and then the girl in Houston, I gave her a geode of bismuth with the hearts. You guys saw it already, right? I wonder if they realize they're sitting on some not a whole lot of money, but some good money now, right? All right. So please continue to pray. So for the 5-year anniversary of COVID, I would so much like this one anniversary gift. I would like to catch COVID-19. Because last summer, I was so heartbroken last summer when I had COVID-19 during a heat wave. And I'd so much love to get it done with this year. Give you an idea of how heartbroken I was. I got COVID-19 and then I got long-term symptoms. There was a heat wave and then I had to go out to get supplies for myself. And while I was out, people were upset that I was out, right, loitering in the store. You know, I was kind of going slow because I was recovering from COVID. And also, my ex-girlfriend had just gotten married, and I wasn't so heartbroken, but it was like the world's churning by, and I'm dealing with COVID. You know, it's kind of funny. I had a dream about my ex-girlfriend a year before that. I dreamt that I wanted revenge on her for some reason, and so I had made a radioactive piece of art to give to her as a wedding gift. You know, and so they hung it on their wall, and the two of them were just slowly being killed by the radioactive art. Well, I guess I did give her some radioactive art as a wedding gift. It was a few quintillion times too weak to kill her, and in fact, it's now given them a fortune, a small fortune, instead of killing them. But it was one proton shy of doing what I wanted it to do, right? And okay, all right. So 5-year anniversary of COVID-19. Please pray that I catch COVID-19 today as an anniversary gift. This is the Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum.